Welcome to World History. Today we're going to talk about Central America and start bringing the Americas into the whole Atlantic world. And so we're going to focus on the Aztec Empire today, an empire that had great cultural works, had amazing irrigation, a complex political structure, and a religious structure that involved ripping still beating hearts out of people's chests and then displaying them to the crowd. So our objectives for today are this. We're going to evaluate the accomplishments of the Aztec Empire, analyze the response of the Aztecs to the arrival of Europeans, and identify the factors that led the Aztec Empire to fall and be destroyed. So without further ado, let's talk Aztec Empire. It's important to note that the Aztec peoples are just one of a number of different Native American peoples that make up the Aztec Empire. And although the emperor of the Aztecs does control all of these different areas, really the Aztec territory is right here in the center. And so the Aztec Empire is a multi-ethnic empire made up of lots of different groups of people. And one of the things with the outer groups of people having to give things to the Central Aztec Empire in exchange for protection and their integration into the state. So there's lots of different groups within the empire. Probably the most sensationalistic part of the Aztec Empire is Aztec religion. They built very complex structures known as ziggurats, these huge pyramids that are used for religious rituals. Most famously, of course, the rituals of human sacrifice by which Aztec high priests would rip out the still beating hearts of their victims, discarding the corpses down the stairs. The goal of this, of course, was to appease Aztec gods and to make sure that everything was going well in the Aztec Empire. But the downside, of course, is there's a significant human cost to this, and many of the outlying tribes in the empire didn't particularly like the Aztecs because, of course, they're the ones who are providing the sacrifices whose hearts are being literally ripped out of their chests. These tributary peoples made up most of the people within the Aztec Empire, and so although they did trade in some other goods, the sacrifices that had to be sent to the Aztec capital were one of the key things that these tributary peoples contributed to the Aztec Empire as a whole. And so when Spanish people came in looking to overthrow the Aztec Empire, these tributary peoples provided valuable allies to them and were ready to turn on the Aztec Empire because, of course, the whole sacrifice thing made them not the biggest fans of the central Aztec government. The Aztecs, in addition to the sacrifice, which is honestly, it's so central to our understanding of the Aztecs that it's often the only thing that people remember. But it's important to note that they did have very complex agricultural techniques, including the floating gardens or chiapas that we see here. These floating gardens allowed a constant source of water to be moving amongst all of these different crops, and so allowed them to grow crops around their magnificent capital city, which we're going to look to in a minute. So amazing irrigation projects. The Aztecs also had complex culture, including very beautiful and vibrant artwork, a written language that we cannot translate at this point. They invented, or they carried on, the Mesoamerican ball game. It's a sport in which a series of athletes attempt to get a leather ball through this hoop way up here on this wall by using only their elbows and their hips. So it required incredible skill, and in the end, the winners were sacrificed to the gods in order to make sure that things were going well within Aztec society. And so the Aztecs had a complex and vibrant cultural life in addition to the sensationalistic sacrifices. Perhaps the most impressive part of the Aztec Empire was their capital city of Tenochtitlan that we see here. It was a city literally built upon a lake, which was beneficial for a variety of different reasons. We already sort of looked at how they used the water in order to grow crops and to irrigate, but it also made the city very difficult to attack because If they were under siege, they could just pull up some of these causeways here, and then it's a naturally designed moat around this amazing metropolis. This city had more people in it than most European cities at the time, and so it stands as an example of how complex and advanced the Aztec culture was before Europeans showed up. And that brings us to the arrival of Cortes. Cortes is what's known as a Spanish conquistador, and he was the one who brought down the Aztec Empire. Cortes was successful despite the fact that he was outnumbered by a substantial margin, because Aztec religion had predicted that someone would come, that a god would return right about the time that Cortes showed up. And Cortes sort of matched the description of the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl, whose name you don't need to remember. Because of this, Cortes was welcomed in to the Aztec Empire as opposed to being killed on sight, and was actually brought into an audience with the chief of the Aztec Empire, Moctezuma. Cortes then seized control of Moctezuma and held him hostage, extorting money from the Aztecs for a while, until the king was killed and Cortes was forced to flee, losing a significant portion of his army in the process. So Cortes held the Aztec king captive for a while, but eventually the plan fails and Cortes has to hightail it out of the Aztec capital. But despite Cortes's failure, the Aztec civilization collapsed for a couple of different reasons. One reason was, of course, the king had died. And so the Aztecs were leaderless. The second factor is that disease, specifically smallpox, had already started spreading throughout the Aztec capital city and throughout many of the Aztec lands, killing a significant portion of the Aztec population. Also, native allies joined with Cortes to try to overthrow the hated Aztecs, and the advanced Spanish metalworking allowed fully armored Spanish soldiers to kill significant numbers of much less armored Aztecs. So all of these factors together led the Spanish to be able to conquer this massive empire in Central America. The Spanish then simply displaced the Aztecs as the ruler of Central America and took control of all their territory, immediately giving them control of most of what is today Mexico. And so with that, the Aztec Empire falls, and the Spanish are in control of a significant portion of Central America. Which brings us back to our objectives for today. So hopefully you can provide some details in order to answer these questions, and we'll come back tomorrow moving downward towards South America, where a very similar story is going to play out.